Bonjour, Anine, and welcome back to our next session here. And again, I'm learning so much, and I'm sure that you are as well, taking notes aplenty and jotting things down. And hopefully you're playing along with our Play to Win code word. We'll have another word for you at the end of this presentation for you to jot down. And who knows, at the end of today's presentations, you might be one of the big prize winners. Now, when it comes to growing plants, having a garden, I'm not very good at it. So I've been looking forward to this session all day long. Our guest this time around is Sarah Caldwell Bennett, and Sarah is certainly centrally assigned instructional coach for the Keewatin Patricia District School and is based out of Kenora on Treaty Number 3, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and peoples of the Métis Nation. Hello to our Métis friends tuning in. She is the leader for an experimental learning for her school board, where she has a focus on land-based, outdoor, and experimental learning. Sarah also does work with pathways and guidance counselors from grade 7 to 12. Sarah also does work with, she has a deep connection to the land and earth, obviously. And when you can't find her at the school, she's likely outside skiing, gardening, hiking, fishing, walking her dogs, or just hanging out by the lake. So please make welcome to our sessions here, Sarah Caldwell Bennett. Sarah, take it away.
Bonjour, Tenzi. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Bennett, and I'm just going to start sharing my screen here right away. And Jerry, you want to maybe give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Perfect. Awesome. So I will be your presenter today for the Gitchimino Gitagane Bamadaziwan Growing the Future Garden Project. I am grateful for the opportunity to share with you today for the NAN Land-Based Learning Gathering. So Marcy Miigwech for sharing this space with me today. When I decided to apply to be a speaker for this event, I thought, oh, where am I going to start? There's so much to talk about it when it comes to land-based learning. And I know there's other amazing speakers that you've already seen and I've had the pleasure of listening to over the last couple of days. So I decided to start at the beginning of my professional journey with land-based learning. Years ago, I encouraged one of my colleagues to attend this conference in one of the in-person sessions pre-COVID. He came back and raved about the learning and inspiration he got from attending the event, and he wanted to funnel this new knowledge into a land-based program of his own at our high school. Our department was Modern Languages and Cultural Studies, and as his department head, I was happy to jump in this endeavor with him. He wanted this to be more than just a series of one-off land-based events. He wanted something that went deeper and included his Anishinaabe class, which he teaches the language for. So to get started, we decided building relationships with elders and community organizations were going to be at the forefront of our work, and we got started. So in supporting his program, I've increased my own understanding of land-based education, expanded my connections within the region, and increased my thirst for wanting to know more, so much so that I started attending conferences like this one myself. And if you've been to this conference before, you know that they're always full of outstanding speakers. I was able to build on my own knowledge and left feeling confident to run bigger programs on my own. And I just want a little plug here. I actually started reaching out to some of these presenters, so feel free to do that with me as well. And I'll share my contact information. You can see my email there. So going back to last spring when we were locked down and I attended this event, if you had asked me, I'd be ready to share my own experiences with land-based learning in a setting like this. I'm not sure I would have believed you. I still feel new in this work, even though I've been at it for years with my own classes now. But I can say that I'm infinitely more ready now than I was a year ago at this time. This is how powerful this work is for students and educators alike. Being here today is a special opportunity for me, and I encourage you to do the work so you can help share the good in your circle of influence as well. This year's theme, Learning Concepts from the Land, allowed me to pause and think about my programming and learning that I've been doing over the past few years through this lens. I could have talked about a number of different programs, but I felt it was best to decide on one, and one that you might be able to take back to your own context and add your own innovation to. Specifically, I decided to look at this work since the pandemic began because the reality is this is still happening today. I'm happy to share with you one of those programs that emerged during this time. You'll find that land-based programs are rooted in relationship, and this program is no exception to it. So With relationships in mind, and before formally beginning, and although I can't see the chat right now, I invite everyone to share in the chat where you are joining us from today, and maybe a little bit about your context. If you're a teacher, elementary or secondary, your organization, your role, etc. Anything you are willing to share, please feel free to add that to the chat now. This will give us an opportunity to make connections with one another, but it also helps us find some commonalities. Finding something in common is a great way to build a relationship with another person. I'll warn you that there is a slight delay with my Zoom and yours, so please forgive me if I move too quickly at certain points, and I'm hoping my tech support keeps me honest too. Speaking of relationships, I do joke with my friends and my colleagues that it's dangerous to know me, because I'm likely going to ask you for something somewhere along the lines. And it usually starts with either I have a question or I have an idea. And I hate to tell you this, but now you're all a part of my circle and network. So wait for that to happen. So thanks for connecting with me today, and thanks for adding to the chat. I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself. I live in Longbow Lake, Ontario, just outside of Kenora, Ontario, in Treaty Number 3. Winter has finally let go and sprung us right into kind of early summer weather. We just had a storm go through. So it's a little bit gloomy in the room I'm in right now. I do apologize for that. But I'm very excited to be heading into my favorite season, which is gardening season. I was born and raised in the Lake of the Woods area, but have roots in Manitoba, where most of my extended family lives. I was born to a Métis mother and a Franco-Manitoban father. I speak 2 colonial languages and have unearned privilege from my white skin. I was raised by my mom, who has helped me build a strong relationship with land and water. This relationship influences so much of my life, including my career and how my husband and I are raising our children. I'm the leader of experiential learning for KPDSB, although I have held many roles over the last 16 years. And I've held experiential learning, outdoor ed, and land-based learning in high regard in all those positions. Experiences like this type of learning quickly evolved into community-based learning as well, moving from learning for engagement to learning for empowerment for students. And today's session talks about one of those programs. I hope you enjoy what I'm about to share. And if you want to reach out to me later, please feel free to do so at the email on the slide here. Okay, so now I'm going to share with you our story of the Gitchimino Gitagane Bamada Ziwan Growing the Future Garden Project. The short Western version is that students made a garden, they got paid to do it, and they earned us a co-op credit as well. But I assure you, the story is much richer than that. Today, I'll dive into how the project got started, how it came to be, and who made this possible. I'm also going to share the success stories we had along the way. While this presentation does involve a lot of talking by me, I am going to ask you to fill out a poll or two and a Menti, so please feel free to contribute if you choose to do so. We're also going to have some time for Q&A at the end of the session. So last week, my superintendent came to me and said, I have a summer garden idea and I think you're going to like it. It has to do with gardening. And I'll be honest, she had me at gardening. So I said yes right away. I'm an avid gardener and local plant harvester and do what I can to preserve much of our summer treasures every summer. I had used gardening and harvesting in my classes before many times, but nothing as big as this was going to be with students, simply because school's out for summer, so we had no one to look after the gardens. I took this as an opportunity to meld my outside passions with my career, and I was extremely excited about this opportunity. I'm just going to prompt my tech support to get ready with that first poll question. So my superintendent had received funding from the Ministry of Child and Family Services in partnership with local child and family service organizations to provide an experience for students in care looking to attain summer credits and work in their first jobs. Students in care are inherently at risk for a variety of reasons. I've heard stats that indicate that each time a child is moved homes, they face a 3 to 4 month setback in school. And we know moving around is sometimes the reality of many of our students in care. Staying on track to graduation, therefore, would be increasingly difficult with all these setbacks. The idea of the garden program was to provide students with an experience that would help bridge this potential gap and provide wraparound supports that assist them in getting into employment in their teenage years, which would help mitigate some of these factors. The idea was to create a garden that students would make and maintain throughout the summer, similar to the community gardens run by organizations like Roots to Harvest in Thunder Bay and Harvest Kenora here in Kenora. We followed their work closely and became connected with them, asking questions and learned how to get started with their help. So I'm now is probably pretty close to the time where that poll is coming up. And the poll should read, do you have any experience with school-based gardens or gardening or harvesting as a tool for learning? And I gave you a few options there. A lot of experience, some experience, a little experience, or no experience. Okay, hopefully that's getting filled out. So community gardening was still pretty new for me, despite my experience with harvesting and gardening on my own. But it had been something I had hoped to get started with, and now it was kind of sitting at my doorstep. And I can't say enough about Harvest Kenora in particular, who helped us, although we modeled a lot of stuff after Roots to Harvest. And my SO had been connected with Roots to Harvest, so that was a really great connection for us too. I'm just gonna ask Chris if that was enough time for the poll and maybe the results. Okay, awesome. Some experience. Good. No experience. That's okay. Even better. You're going to learn some stuff today. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we'll go back. There. Jerry, is that back up? My screen back up? Perfect. Thanks. Great. Thanks for contributing to that. So some of you are here with some experience, some not. That's okay. We're going to learn a few things, hopefully, or maybe you can teach me something. So the garden project would be a 6-week paid co-op for students identified by Child and Family Services in collaboration with the local high school, Beaver Bay Secondary. And just to be clear, the funding was actually paying them. So they were our employees. We didn't have to find them a co-op with the local business. We were legitimately their employer. Although it might not have felt like that at times because there was a lot of learning going on. We had 8 students participate in the program. 6 students were Anishinaabe and 2 were non-Indigenous. Most of the students were finishing grades 9 or 10 as they entered in the summer, although it wasn't mandatory to not have a job previous to this. Most of them, actually all of them, did not have a job previous to starting this. So this was the beginning of their employment experience. Students would participate in those usual pre-service preparation tasks through their co-op, like any other co-op student during the summer. However, they would have extra support along the way. The co-op teacher would support as usual, in addition to the Child and Family Services folks, myself as a summer learning coordinator, a hired student support worker in second year education, along with outside community supports for students who needed it. So for example, we had 2 kids that came with a job coach from an outside organization, so they were welcomed into the program as well. This was truly a added value co-op placement. Student had support and connections with positive adults on multiple fronts. The goals of the program are pretty simple: address academic gaps in credit accumulation, focus on employability skills, and connect students with community resources and partners. Additionally, it was important that we participated in this program in a good way by adding Anishinaabe and Métis cultural ties in a culturally responsive and relevant way. So where to start? This program had never been run before. We were in a lockdown in Ontario at the time. How do you start a land-based program when you aren't together on the land? I needed to find a way to solve this puzzle and fast, and I needed to help make sure that students could benefit from this amazing program. So I did what I thought was best and turned into 2 of my close friends. I'm lucky enough to call them close friends, Anishinaabe elders that I have a strong relationship with. And I asked them over for dinner. Don't worry, it was outside. It was still in lockdown after all. And I offered them tobacco and asked them to help guide the program in a good way. Thankfully, they were excited to hear about the program too, and were happy to help. So our planning began right away. I should note that I've been learning from these 2 elders for a number of years, and it never ceases to amaze me how much knowledge and clarity they give me each and every time. And jeepers, talk about patience. I'm self-proclaimed the queen of asking questions, and they seem a way find a way to tolerate it. So I do really appreciate them. So what was initially a community garden focus for this project, thinking about the Ministry of Education's pathway document and education and career planning, as you see here on the screen, quickly turned into deep learning that came from the land with guidance from Bert and Eleanor as the elders supporting our learning, including concepts of the concept of walking two pathways, which became an anchor in our way of thinking in the program. And just a side note, I sometimes hear people refer to this walking two pathways as two-eyed seeing in different regions. So you might be more familiar with that term. So in other words, this opportunity was going to be more than just like a checklist on this ministry document. In preparing for this presentation, I've looked back on a lot of the workshops, conferences, PD, and reading I've done over the years myself. And I've been fortunate enough to spend time listening to great speakers like Nagan Sinclair, Kevin Lamoureux, Lindsay Brandt, and more. And in timely fashion, someone I follow on Twitter posted a picture of Nagan Sinclair's presentation at their own school board recently, which reminded me about how he describes the curriculum of Indigenous education. And I can't help but see some similarities between his list here and the ministry document. So I'm going to show you in a second. But I just want to say that I created the document off this just for my own thinking. So side by side, you can see some similarities and you can also see some differences. So at the top of both, who am I? Who am I? Okay, that aligns nicely. Where am I going? What is my plan for achieving my goals? I thought those were kind of similar. Why am I here? And what are my opportunities? Okay, those are kind of on the same path. But one distinction for me was, if we look on the right, Nagan Sinclair's list here, who can help me? And I think that's a big missing piece from the career document on the left. And that's the one that made the Garden Project a growing, no pun intended, success. So as we go through this talk today, please keep in mind the question, who can help me? And consider it for your own students that you work with. So I'm going to attempt to do a word cloud with you guys, and I'm going to ask my tech support to maybe drop that link in the chat, and feel free to answer that even while I'm talking, because we do have that delay. So thank you for that tech support. So through this program, the elders shared with students the importance of walking both their Anishinaabe and Western ways of life, and learning how to navigate those two pathways in Mino Babanaziwin, a good life or in a good way. Analogies were made about life, gardening, seasonality, and more through this lens. Stories were shared that supported this thinking and learning by the elders. Students participated in an opening and closing ceremony with many lessons along the way from Bert and Eleanor, along with other community partners all summer long. Here is a photo of one of the sections of the gardens that student built with Jake Boutwell from Harvest Kenora, and with help from the shop teacher, high school, Chris Hopkins. This was just a regular old backyard. It was just lawn prior to that, and it grew into so much more. So students built picnic tables, benches, they extended the fence line because there's a deer problem in Kenora, and the occasional bear and raccoons occasionally, and created structures for their climbing plants, arranged a fire pit, even made raised beds on their own one day when they thought they had outgrown the space we had given them. While pandemic restrictions were still in effect in mid-June, our health unit, who I was in contact with regularly, felt it was best that each student have their own rows. So you can see kind of on that left picture, which is in early summer, and then later in summer on the right. So each student had one of those rows. They decided what was going to get planted for it. They decided what structure they needed for their plants to support it, and they maintained it all summer long. These rows added to the lessons and stories the elders shared about pathways in life. Those rows really truly symbolized their pathway in life. The elders made reference to comparing how students treated their garden rows with how they treated their lives. Students became invested in their plants and developed relationships with them, and were able to speak to their future pathways a little more articulately. I'll share more on this later, but it was evident that this program had a positive impact on students. Okay, so I'm hoping, just going to check right now, if that Menti link was added. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We were just kind of shooting for the stars there. Okay, I don't think it's gonna work, so I'm just gonna move forward so we don't waste any time. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So what do you think of when you hear the word garden? Well, naming the garden and allowing students to be at the center of this piece of the program actually was one of my favorite moments of the whole summer. We started this work at home and online during the lockdown initially. And we started with the question, that same question I just had posted there on a Jamboard. And here are some of the responses. So bugs, dirt, soil, hummingbirds, unwanted vermin, happiness, caring. There were a lot of great words here. So then we moved into the question of what should we name our garden? And keep in mind, we hadn't met each other in person yet. So this was really just getting to know each other virtually, which was still good in the circumstances, but wasn't the same as doing this in person for sure. And we got really great responses here. So they kind of took that first brainstorm and they started coming up with ideas of their own. And there were some patterns. We saw the word growing a lot. We saw the word sustainable or sustainability. And they really had a good understanding of some of these big, deep concepts, even at grade 9 and 10. And it was just really great. Luckily, soon after these discussions, we were able to start work on site with students. So they got to know some skills and concepts about gardening firsthand. For many, it was the first time they'd worked in a garden or even taken care of something. It was almost like having a second brainstorm for naming the garden because they were learning about tools, vocabulary associated with gardening, and so on and so forth. And that led us to our next step. So when summer officially started, we were able to host an opening ceremony, as I mentioned. And we ended the day by talking about the name of the garden with Bert and Eleanor. And this was our first encounter in person together as a whole group due to the lockdown, but you never would have known it. Students brought their ideas to the elders, eventually naming the garden Growing the Future. And thinking about the goals of the program and based on their own brainstorming. And well, the discussion after that was just, it was just wow. I got goosebumps listening to the students talk. At one point, Eleanor, one of the elders, and I just looked at each other and we didn't know what to say. We were so impressed with their ideas, how they fed off each other, and the interest in their work already. Students then asked Bert and Eleanor if they could translate the words Growing the Future, which brought me to my next goosebump moment, where Bert and Eleanor talked about walking two pathways again, and how this garden could have an English name and an Anishinaabemowin name that weren't necessarily direct translations of one another or in competition with one another, but helped complete the meaning of the program in a good way. In other words, these two names could work in unison to make it complete. Then, with the elders' help, students created the name Gichimino Gitigani Bamadiziwan for the Anishinaabe part of the name. So Gichi meaning very or great, Gichimigwich, Mino meaning good, Gitigani meaning garden, and Bamadiziwan meaning life. So as a French teacher myself, I know direct translations don't always give ideas justice. The example I often use in French is that in English we say, I miss you, but in French we say, tu me manques, which literally means like you're missing from me. Now, if you think about that for a second, that might sound a bit strange or a bit off, but it actually might have a deeper meaning if you chose to look at it that way. So I've actually never seen the movie Lost in Translation, but I'm familiar with the term. And losing something in translation was not something we wanted for this garden name. So we attempted. So if you wanted to translate this word directly, these words Gichi Mino Gitigani Bamadiziwan, it would mean very good garden life. But that doesn't totally justify it. It equates to the great garden of life, which although is different from Growing the Future, properly completes the meaning of the learning that happened through this garden project and really aligns with students walking two pathways. So before we knew it, students had a sketch of a logo in their hand with Gichimino, Gitigani, Bamadiziwan on the top and then Growing the Future on the bottom. We had talked a lot about sustainable living practices, reciprocity, communities, and even economies, and how they need to work together to support one another. And for them, that's what the purple arrows kind of leading into each other, that was how they were representing those concepts. And of course, no Beaver Bay program would be complete without our purple bee. There were so many amazing aspects of this program, but naming the garden is one that'll be etched in my memory for years to come. And it's one Bert and Eleanor and I have talked about many times since. Students wore this logo proudly on their shirts and long sleeves that the program purchased for them. So like this became more than just like their work shirts or their logos, but a source of pride. And I'm wearing mine with pride today too. There were many other successful moments in this program. We connected students to so many great things. It's hard to keep track of it all and gauge which moments were our favorites. We work closely with Harvest Kenora and learning from their experience. Follow them on Facebook if you want to check them out. And if you're more in the Thunder Bay area, I would go to Roots to Harvest. We also worked with Kenora Chiefs Advisory at their amazing site on Strucker Farms, where they hold their youth and cultural wellness program. And if you know about this place or get a chance to visit it, tour it, or participate in any of their work, please do. You will be amazed. They have lots of programming planned for youth over the summer months. So follow them too on social media. But it turns out that some of the more logistical pieces were highlights for students too, as they learn to navigate employment for the first time, which we didn't really expect. We might have thought as adults as those being kind of low interest for students, but they're actually quite valuable. For example, there were students that didn't have any personal identification to start the program. We had kids who didn't have birth certificates, SIN numbers, bank accounts, you name it. And for some, getting that personal documentation was the biggest challenge and the biggest achievement through the program. We also offered certifications through pre-service co-op work and HR training, getting certifications and training through WMIS, COVID-19 safety, work safety, allergy awareness, and more. It was important for them in the moment, but also to put their names on their resumes for later, right? Through this, students learned how to tackle HR things like tracking hours, submitting timesheets, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, going through these steps helps students gain independence for moving forward. Having personal documentation and some work experiences serve students well, with many of them now into their second jobs already. In addition to all the supports I've already mentioned, including Bert and Eleanor and other community partners, we also had a student support worker who helped students with goal setting and more with the co-op piece and employment skills. Lexi worked with students as they identified some of their main goals for themselves. For all students, it was their first job and they had clear goals and motivation going into it. So stamina for a workday, social confidence, independent and group work experience, as well as time management. And I'll just remind everybody here, we were coming out of a second spring lockdown, so social confidence and work stamina was a real thing for many of us to have to work on, never mind teenagers. So it was pretty great that they could articulate that. At the end of the summer, Lexi also asked students what they were most proud of. And you can see here that there were many proud moments, some of which we needed to hear directly from students, as we may not have guessed them ourselves. So getting my birth certificate after years of trying, I think about this student often still today. She had tried getting her birth certificate for years to no avail. And now with a team of adults behind her, we were able to help her get it, which in turn helped her to apply for a SIN number and a bank account. In other words, now she could get a job. This is how you change a kid's life, right? So that kid, she got her second job right away. She's amazing. I can't say enough about her. I've shared this talk before, and she's actually done it with me. Unfortunately, she wasn't available today. Growing my own garden, that was a good one too. Gardening is a lifelong skill and one that promotes sustainable living and food practices and connects us to the earth. Many of the kids had never taken care of a plant before, never mind produce their own food. This was a big achievement for all. Learning how to socialize more and work in groups. We had students that were not comfortable in group settings, and COVID only made that worse. We were able to help these students build confidence throughout the summer, connecting them with opportunities and people that helped make that happen. And expanding student networks, as I think I've mentioned already, is a big piece of this program. So this student did virtual school from the beginning of the pandemic into that summer, and actually came back to Beaver Bay for in-person learning for the first time since the pandemic began. And you can see the confidence that that kid has grown over this program. It's pretty amazing. And many others shared that the time spent with Bert and Eleanor are the elders that worked with us, that their connection with them was the most important and proudest moment of the work that they did with this project. But because it wasn't a connection they had before, and now it was a connection that they continue with. And although it probably goes without saying, I'm going to say it anyway, connecting students to elders was a key part of this process. The knowledge they were able to share about the land, the water, and life, and just the knowledge they provided us anchored our program. The importance of their guidance cannot be overstated. So when I was thinking about the strengths of this first year project, I can easily say that it aligned with this photo of a message I saw on Twitter recently about grade 9 D-stream subjects. Sometimes the teacher just needs to get out of the way. And that's a hard thing to say as an educator. We're used to holding the knowledge or the learning or the plan that's going to take place. And we're used to being at the front of the room. That's how we were taught to teach. And that's because that's how we were taught. And although I can say this in a kind of joking way, I'm actually quite serious about it too. The needs of education have shifted greatly over the years, and the need for community support is just one of those areas. Students need to be the stars of their learning stories, and we need to acknowledge as educators that the community, meaning elders, knowledge keepers, organizations, even private business, have a lot to offer students during their school years and beyond. It's our job as educators to help facilitate those relationships. So we need to start thinking about how the four walls of our classroom are not the only space where learning can happen. The outdoors supports physical and mental well-being and reconnects students to the land through place and relationships. Indigenous and non-Indigenous students alike benefit from the land and outdoor learning experiences. So get outside. If we expand our educational spaces or environments, then we embody that learning can happen anywhere and everywhere, furthering our views of becoming lifelong learners, much like what Nagan Sinclair shared on his views of Indigenous education. We cannot have done this good work without this type of focus in the Garden Project. Early in the talk, I asked you to think about the question from Nagan Sinclair's Indigenous education curriculum, who will help me? The Garden Project would not have been possible without community support. End of story. This is just a short list of the partners that we worked with over the summer. In addition to elders like Bert and Eleanor, we also had other elders participate and knowledge keepers help us regularly too. I leaned on the relationships I already had, but also I wasn't shy about making new connections within our community. I can honestly say that my network has never been bigger or stronger, and I'm sure it's because of this program. So that was something that I personally got out of it too. Harvest Kenora Chiefs Advisory went above and beyond to support this work. As I mentioned before, I'm forever grateful for the start they gave us in our first year. Harvest Kenora advised us on how to get started with the physical work and invited us into their own space to learn from them as well. KCA provided workshops, connected us to the great programming and their great people. They currently provide amazing programs for youth and are developing more and more every day. Please check them out. OGB Honeyco, they were star guest speakers as they are Beaver Bay Secondary graduates. It was so great to highlight former students to current students in their employment endeavors and to see their successes and that they're still connected to the land. Local greenhouses were amazing. We learned about gardening as well as business and financial literacy pieces in industry. The city of Kenora showed us around the Matioski Farmers Market, talked about marketing, selling produce, and tourism as a whole. And we also had support from 7 Generations Manitou Bawateg here in Kenora, giving us a second location for our garden. So we had a second garden. and a place to work on those rainy days, as well as those forest fire smoke-filled days that we had last summer. Northwestern Ontario had quite a few fires. So students left this program with an extended network of positive adults and organizations in their life that will continue to support them moving forward. And research shows that the larger the network a student has leaving high school, the more likely they are to gain meaningful employment after graduation. There is no doubt that this program contributed to that network of positive relationships for students moving forward. So now our next steps. We are fortunate enough to have received funding for this project again this year. I've met with key partners, made a student list, and implemented a few additions and changes from last year as we learned from our first year program. There are many advantages to being in person right now, and I'm able to take advantage of the home school personnel supports for students. The Beaver Bay 4 Directions team have already planned a social insurance number workshop. Actually, it's happening tomorrow. And all students are able to attend to help get ahead in this process, especially our garden kids. We are also hopeful to expand this program into other communities within our school board in the coming years, and the groundwork has already begun for that. Luckily, we are able to plant this year's garden several weeks earlier than last year, which is going to increase our food production. So last summer, we did various food prep with what produce we could grow. And we actually held a summer market at the end, donating our proceeds to the Nietzsche Friendship Center with what we had. More produce, though, this year means we will have to change how we operate from last year a little bit. As we planted so late and had restrictions on what we could grow, we had to think about those plants that could grow in a short season. So I've already made connections within the community, and I'm looking forward to contributing our produce to some great community-minded programs, such as ones that provide produce boxes weekly to the women's shelter. It's programs like these that focus on learning from the land that will help students, regardless of their academics, home settings, challenges, engagements, and interests. We'll continue to keep students at the center of this program while balancing that we're still living in a pandemic. Programs like the Gitchimino Gitgane Bamadaziwan help inspire a reimagined way of learning in today's public school system that connects students to community and moves their learning from engagement to empowerment and having a positive impact on their future. I am extremely proud of this program, the students who participated in it, and the growth we made as educators to support this work for students in land-based education. I could go on and on and on about this program, but in the interest of time, I will leave it here so that you can ask a few questions that you might have about starting your own program or about the program that we ran. But feel free to email me. I'm pretty good at checking my email and getting back, but I'll do my best. It is a busy time of year. So miigwech, merci, and thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for that wonderful presentation. And it was an action-packed presentation, a lot of good information in there. I want to acknowledge some of the people. We have got, it's an international audience now. We want to say hello to Gail. Gail tuned in from the Upper Peninsula from Michigan. So that's, we're reaching far and wide here. Mary from Pekanjikam. Mary Ann from, works with mental health in Mattawa. Gina from Red Lake works as a youth coordinator. And we've got E. Siop An from Pekanjikam. We've got, I believe, Michelle Ann, who is a grade 1 teacher in Big Trout Lake. So we're reaching all kinds of demographics here. Sherry from Thunder Bay, Sarah from the Sioux Lookout Treaty 3 region, Cindy from Martin Falls, Martha from Moose Factory, works with the Indigenous Experimental Learning as a Indigenous Experimental Learning Resource teacher, Anna Percy from Keewatin Public School, Gail from Michigan, and Lindy and Dana from Mississauga First Nation, a couple more, Michael from the Matagami First Nation, and a principal was watching from the Lillienberg School. So you've reached a lot of people, and I'm sure you've touched a lot of inspiration out there, sent out a lot of positive thoughts. So that is awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for all of that. You've been very busy in your days. And that is our presentation for now. I don't see any questions here, other than the fact that you've got a long line of contacts there. They've all supplied their contact information, and I'm sure if they have questions, they'll reach out to you. So miigwech. So once again, that is a very important topic on giving back to the community through gardening in your community. And hopefully that's inspired a lot of green thumbs to get out there and work away. All right, with this session wrapping up, we do have another play to win code word for you, and that is pathways. Pathways is the play to win code. Jot that down. The word is pathways, and you too could win some wonderful prizes coming up at the end of the conference, which will draw to a close a little bit later on here. And we have another presentation coming up for you. We're going to get all prepared for that. So once again, thank you for joining us, and a big miigwech to Sarah.